While the federal government committed today to building a new gas-fired power station in the Hunter Valley to keep the lights on and to keep electricity prices down, as I brought to you last night, the International Energy Agency has instead declared there should be no new coal, gas or oil fields opened up, none whatsoever, in order for the world to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So while we need new fossil-fuelled power sources in Australia in order to live normally and cheaply, it seems the world powers that be say we can't have them if we're to reach emissions targets that everyone, including it seems the Morrison government, says we absolutely must achieve. Something has to give in a situation like this. And it's well done here to Energy Minister Angus Taylor, who's putting keeping the lights on and maintaining industrial jobs now ahead of cutting emissions in 30 years' time, especially since Australia has been much better than green blowhards, Canada and New Zealand, at actually getting emissions down rather than just talking about it. It's also good that the government has been prepared to stand up to the free market ideologues here also, given there's no free market to preserve in Australia's energy sector. That market failed years ago, thanks to constant green tinkering and left-dominated policies. And as such, the government's ordered Snowy Hydro to get cracking and build this gas-fired power station. As you can see, I'm a lot more comfortable with a centre-right government stepping in to ensure the smooth delivery of essential services than I am with one mortgaging the future to pad out government services, pad out government spending, more and more of it baked in, as we saw in last week's budget. Still, there's a problem here, a big one. It's only going to get worse. You see, buried in the business pages today was a further announcement that Australia's largest coal-fired power station, Eraring, which produces 20% of New South Wales power, well, Eraring will start to be shut down in 2030 and fully close 2032, or just a decade from here. The same year, of course, it was supposed to move out of budget deficits. Now, despite the much hyped flood of renewable power into our grid, coal still supplies 70% of our total electricity because it runs 24/7, unlike renewables, which we can only guarantee will be there when the wind blows or the sun shines. But because renewables are very cheap if and when they operate, they're playing havoc with the economics of baseload power. Hence, private companies are rushing to retire their massive coal plants because all they're interested in is a profit plus a little bit of green posturing, and they can always blame the government when things go wrong. Plus, more and more of the lending banks have bowed to woke pressure and are refusing to fund fossil fuel, mines, power plants, all of those things, making it tough on the industry. By the end of this decade, whichever party's in office, expect more agonising about how we keep the power on while also reducing emissions. Because in a country like Australia, with little hydro and an ideological set against zero emissions nuclear power, in the absence of vastly better storage options, the only way to have 24/7 power from your renewables is to basically close down our manufacturing industry. And that, of course, means millions of jobs. The real problem here is the climate cult. No one's prepared to speak out against, even though our whole domestic emissions obsession is futile, given that nothing we do in Australia, with scarcely 1% of the world's total emissions, will make a scrap of difference. While our good friends there in China, with 30% of global emissions, well, they're permitted to increase their emissions, that's right, increase their emissions until at least 2030, and will only then try to achieve net zero by 2060. So on this, as on so much else, politically correct posturing is weakening Australia and other democracies while strengthening and emboldening the Beijing regime that's clearly on the march. With trillion-dollar debt and these deficits now out to a decade, if we make energy unreliable and unaffordable, we're just sending what little industry we have left in this country and the jobs offshore. And if we do that, if that happens, you tell me, without that tax revenue, how on earth do we afford in our country the standard of living we enjoy now? How do we fund the things we've all grown to expect, like the dole, regardless of whether you can and should work, the pension, the NDIS, hospitals, roads, and more? And on this, as with the budget, the Morrison government is sending mixed messages, declaring its commitment to emissions reduction while building a new gas-fired power station, and declaring its commitment to budget responsibility while delivering this decade of deficits. Now, I'm not saying the policy's wrong, just that all of these paradoxes should be far better explained and justified.